If you've ever complained about running out of pads at the worst possible moment, I want you to time travel with me for a minute because old American women managed monthly periods with no wings, no super absorbent polymers, no plastic wrappers, and definitely no cute little pouch in your purse. And they still went to school, worked long shifts, raised kids, cooked, cleaned, and showed up to church in light colored dresses like nothing was happening. My name is Frances Walker. I'm 59 years old, and I used to be a teacher, the kind who always had extra supplies in the desk for students who needed them. Tissues, Band-Aids, a spare hair tie, a safety pin, quiet little rescues. But what I want to talk about today is something older women didn't have a rescue for. They had to build the rescue themselves in a world that barely let them say the word period out loud. So here's the first truth, and it explains almost everything. Before modern disposable products became common, menstruation was managed with cloth. Real cloth, old sheets, rags, cotton pieces. Women would fold them, layer them, and reuse them. That's not a rumor, and it's not a quirky trivia fact. It was household reality for a long time, and it meant periods were as much a laundry problem as they were a body problem. Now imagine the stakes. No adhesive, no snug underwear designed for pads. In fact, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, women's undergarments and clothing styles made everything more complicated. That's why you see the rise of menstrual belts, which were real products you could buy from catalogs. A belt would hold a washable pad in place. It sounds old-fashioned because it is, but it was practical engineering for the body. And if you want a detail that makes modern people sit up straight, some of those older drawers had an open crotch design. It wasn't scandalous. It was about convenience with layered clothing and the realities of bathrooms back then. It also affected how women could wear and change menstrual protection. But holding a pad in place was only half the battle. The other half was leakage because cloth shifts and bodies move and life doesn't pause. So companies sold something called a sanitary apron. One example from the early 1900s was made with rubber attached to cloth and worn under a dress to protect clothing from stains, especially when sitting. Think about that for a second. A rubber-backed shield under layers of fabric in summer heat because the fear of staining your dress was that serious. And here's where the nostalgia hits, not in a cute way, but in a human way. Older women didn't just manage a period, they managed secrecy. Buying products was awkward. Talking about it was awkward. Even carrying anything related to it could feel like you were holding a bright sign that said something private. That's why, when disposable pads finally arrived, the marketing focused heavily on discretion and packaging because women wanted to live their lives without everyone knowing what their bodies were doing. So when did the modern era really begin? A big turning point came after World War I, and it's one of those historical twists that feels almost unreal. Kimberly-Clark produced a highly absorbent material called cellucotton for wartime bandages. Nurses noticed it worked extremely well for menstrual flow, and after the war, that insight helped inspire Kotex, one of the first mass-marketed disposable sanitary napkins. Suddenly, there was an option that didn't require washing, soaking, scrubbing, and praying it dried in time. But I don't want you to picture the 1920s and think every woman instantly had a neat box of pads in her bathroom like we do today. Many women still made their own supplies at home. Disposable products cost money, and not everyone had it. Plus, habit is powerful. If your mother taught you one method, that method becomes normal. And that brings me to one of my favorite details, because it shows women were never passive in this story. In the late 1920s, an efficiency expert named Lillian Moeller Gilbreth and her team analyzed women's feedback about menstrual products. Thousands of women answered questionnaires. They complained when pads were too bulky, too stiff, too thick, too obvious. They wanted comfort and protection, yes, but they also wanted something they could carry without embarrassment. And that's not just history. That's the exact same conversation we still have today, just with different product names. Now, let's get really honest about the day-to-day reality for old American women who used cloth. It meant planning. It meant having enough pieces ready before your cycle started. It meant having a private place to store them. It meant washing blood out of fabric without modern washing machines for many households. It meant line drying and hoping nobody asked too many questions. It meant dealing with chafing, shifting, and the constant little mental math of how long you could be away from home. And it meant that if you were a girl in school or a woman working outside the home, you had to be even more careful because resting a few days wasn't always allowed anymore as the 20th century pushed women to keep up a steady pace. People also forget that earlier generations often had different menstrual patterns across a lifetime. Many women spent more time pregnant or nursing, which can reduce the number of periods across the years. That doesn't mean it was easy. It means the rhythm of life itself shaped the rhythm of menstruation in ways that can feel foreign to modern ears. And I want to say one more thing, especially as a former teacher. When we talk about how women managed periods back then, it's easy to turn it into a joke or make it sound like everybody was suffering in silence and nobody knew anything. That's not fair to them. What I see in the real history is a line of problem solvers, women who engineered solutions out of fabric and belts and routine, women who taught daughters quietly the same way teachers slip a spare hoodie to a student who needs one. Women who carried on through a world that demanded they be invisible about it. So when you open a modern package today and you hear that little crinkle, just remember what that sound replaced. Buckets, pins, rubber aprons, catalog belts, stained cloth, and the constant worry of being found out. And if you're still watching, here's the question I want to leave you with, because it's the kind that makes a story go viral for the right reason. What's something your grandmother knew how to do that you never had to learn because technology made it disappear?